Good afternoon, students. Very warm welcome to you all. I am Vijay KR. I am the faculty of history here at L2A. So let us today understand what was the need for the Britishers to discover India's past. As you all know that the East India Company or the British rule in India was a piecemeal conquest and consolidation. So it was annexing one territory after the other and gaining control. So the first initial step was the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar. When they have attained the Diwani of or the revenue collection of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa in 1764, along with that, there were many other existential problems which occurred during the initial administration of Diwani period. So there was a lot of corruption happening by the East India Company officers, and the British Parliament thought that there would be some act which can control the administration of the East India Company in India especially. So thus the Charter Act of 1773 was initiated and it was passed by the Parliament of England, and with that came the also a provision for the establishment of Supreme Court of Bengal. So with the establishment of Supreme Court of Bengal, the British judges have to pronounce judgments on the personal law of Hindus and Muslims. But they were unable to do so because they were trying to find out what are the scriptures or the sources from which the ancient Indians used to take as their sources. So that has become a prime motivator for rediscovering India's past. So it was mostly an administrative necessity than a curiosity or a scholarly curiosity. So with that, thus started discovering India's ancient past. So the initial attempts in understanding ancient past was done by the officers of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. As we have just discussed that there was a provision for the establishment of Supreme Court, and the first jurist as a judge of Supreme Court, Sir William Jones, have arrived in India. He was a polyglot or a multilinguist. It is said that he would speak around 28 languages. So thus, under his guidance and leadership, the Asiatic Society of Bengal was formed in 1784. So one officer by name Charles Wilkin was the first one to translate Bhagavad Gita into English. So he tried to see Bhagavad Gita in the light of promoting monotheistic principles in the ancient India. So Bhagavad Gita is all about Lord Krishna and it's all about promoting monotheistic principles. So why did he try to project Bhagavad Gita as a monotheistic religion than a kind of, as we all know that Hinduism is all polytheism of gods, of many gods. So why did he do that? Why? Because he was looking from history from the Western perspective, because where in the West there was only one dominant religion, which is Christianity, and the state patronage was given to Christianity by all the European empires. So thus he wanted to project that. So the first translation was Bhagavad Gita. Then he also translated Hitopadesha by Vishnu Sharma, as it is mentioned in history. But we all know that Hitopadesha has its roots in Panchatantra, because the Panchatantra, which is much older than Hitopadesha, and it was written by Vishnu Sharma. So Panchatantra is moral values which was represented in the form of animals, and through the emoting the animal characters, moral values were taught to us. So this Hitopadesha was actually written by Narayan Pandit or Narayan Bhatt in the 12th century Nepal. So 12th century AD or CE, he wrote Hitopadesha, and mistakenly Charles Wilkin has titled his book as Hitopadesha by Vishnu Sharma. So that was the second translation. And the third, and you know, Sir William Jones also have translated a code of Gentoo laws. It is the Manu's Dharma Shastra was translated into English as a code of Gentoo laws. Then there is this Colonel, and he also, the William Jones also translated Abhignana Shakuntalam of Kalidasa. So these were the initial attempts to translate the Indian scriptures into English. Then there was this another scholar like Colebrook. He was also an officer of the historian and officer of the East India Company. He translated the Dayabhaga and Mitakshara school of inheritance. So that is where, you know, that was very much prominent in Bengal area. So he translated those treatises which elaborate on the inheritance practices of the Hindus. So thus were the initial attempts to translate and try to understand or to discover India's past. After initial attempts by the officers of the East India Company, and their translations were published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society. So that was named as Asiatic Researches. So this has created a lot of curiosity among the European scholars, and especially in Germany. So they were very much interested in Sanskrit and also rediscovering or discovering India's past by studying Sanskrit. So thus emerged a group of scholars known as Indologists. So many chairs were opened, Sanskrit chairs were opened in many European universities, especially in Germany, England, even in Russia to that matter. So the most prominent of them was Max Muller. So he was very prominent because he was from Germany. He later on went to Oxford and he became a naturalized European, in the sense he citizen of England, and he wrote many treatises translating from Sanskrit to English. So basically he is the one who translated Rig Veda and also other prominent Sanskrit treatises, and he named them as it is called a 50 volume series of books and known as Sacred Books of the East. After Max Muller, other scholars and colonial administrators followed suit in trying to understand or discovering India's past. So, as a collective kind of a decision or a collective opinion, they said that the historians, the Indologists, as well as colonial administrators have categorically said that Indians, quote unquote Hindus, lack historical sense. What are they saying? Ancient Indians, quote unquote, lack historical sense. So, this itself is a very value loaded statement, in the sense, you have many topics hidden in the statement. As you can see here, it is talking about the historical sense. What is historical sense? हिस्ट्री का समझ कैसा है, हिस्ट्री लिखने का समझ है कि नहीं ही है, और हिंदूस को क्यों हाईलाइट किया है, व्हाई डिड दे हाईलाइट ऑन द हिंदूस, एंड वो क्षमता रखता है कि नहीं है। जो हमारा जो पुराना स्कॉलर्स है वो लोग अपना हिस्ट्री लिखने का और अंडरस्टैंड करने का और हमको समझाने का क्षमता रखता है कि नहीं है. सो दिस वाज अ बिग क्वेश्चन, एक क्वेश्चन मार्क था इंडियंस के ऊपर, इंडियन स्पेशली द इंडियन हिस्टोरियंस who were emerging from the later part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. It was a bigger question mark for them whether to, whether really does the ancient Indians lack historical sense. So now let us look at who are those scholars who have categorically said, a kind of a statement, ancient Indian, especially quote unquote Hindus, lack historical sense. So इसमें as I told you, पहला जो है हमको हिस्टोरिकल सेंस के बारे में पता करना चाहिए. सेंस क्या होता है, ठीक है. दूसरा जो है क्यों हिंदू को हाईलाइट किया है, ठीक है. इसका मतलब है कि जो हिस्टोरिकल सेंस के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं उसका मतलब है वो लोग हिस्टोरियोग्राफी के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. हिस्टोरियोग्राफी वो चीज होता है, किसी विषय पर हम हिस्ट्री लिखा जाता है उसको हम हिस्टोरियोग्राफी बोलते हैं. अर्थात आप अशोका इज द कॉज फॉर द डिक्लाइन ऑफ मौर्यन एम्पायर, एक स्टेटमेंट है. सब लोग एग्री नहीं करेंगे ना, तो रोमिला प्रतापर बोलता है कि दैट इज नॉट द ओनली रीजन फॉर फॉर द डिक्लाइन ऑफ मौर्यन एम्पायर. एंड बट अदर हिस्टोरियंस लाइक हर प्रसाद शास्त्री says that Ashoka's pacifist policy of the Dhamma, which led to the Brahmin reaction and the overthrow of Mauryan Empire by a weak successor. So this is all about historiography. एक विषय पे, एक पीरियड पे हिस्ट्री कैसा लिखा जाता है उसको हिस्टोरियोग्राफी माना जाता है. सो इट इज टॉकिंग अबाउट हिस्टोरिकल सेंस. सो हिस्टोरियोग्राफी में देर आर सर्टेन वेरी बेसिक प्रिंसिपल्स और एलिमेंट्स. जो एलिमेंट्स होता है कि हिस्टोरियोग्राफी में क्या क्या एलिमेंट्स होना है. वन इज दी chronology. Then you have a particular period and particular aspect. And what are the sources, जो sources, primary sources को क्या यूज कर रहे हैं और हम कैसे इंटरप्रेट करके उस विषय पे हम कैसे हिस्ट्री लिखा, इतिहास लिखा जा रहा है, वो होता है हिस्टोरियोग्राफी का एलिमेंट्स. सो दिस सेंस जो एलिगेशन ये कॉलोनियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर्स और जो हिस्टोरियंस थे, ब्रिटिश हिस्टोरियंस और इंडोलॉजिस्ट थे, they were saying that Indians, quote unquote Hindus, lack historical sense. So that is historiography. And the second point is, why did they say Hindus? Because यहाँ पे जो है विषय, the subtopic I was mentioning you here is Hindus, because the colonial administrators or scholars, especially the British scholars, James Mill, was an utilitarian. So he was the one who first periodized Indian history. इंडियन हिस्ट्री को भागों में डिवाइड किया है. पहला जो भाग है, पुरान भाग है, उसको बोला है कि हिंदू पीरियड, और जो मध्यकालीन पीरियड को बोला है मुस्लिम पीरियड, और आधुनिक काल को जो बोला है वो ब्रिटिश पीरियड बोल के वो पीरियडाइज किया है. सो ही वाज द वन हु पीरियडाइज्ड the Indian history into Hindu period, Muslim period and the British period. So उसीलिए those scholars have alleged that ancient Indians, quote unquote Hindus, lack historical sense. So यहाँ पे periodization आया. So now let us see कि कौन कौन ऐसा स्कॉलर्स है और किस नजरिए से वो लोग हमारा जो इतिहास को देखा है और बोला है कि हिस्टोरिकल सेंस नहीं है। जो पहला स्कॉलर जो बोलता है कि वो है कैप्टन लाइनल जेम्स टॉरेट। कैप्टन लाइनल जेम्स एंड WH ये लोग बोलते हैं कि लाइनल जेम्स especially is important because he was the one who translated and wrote on, Warren Hastings and Lord Lawrence, and also wrote about the early Indian history till the present times. Or Hutton also is a British historian who have worked on the primary sources of India, especially the Sanskrit sources. So ये लोग बोलता है कि not one Hindu have produced one document of historical importance, not one Hindu. Not one Hindu produced one historical document despite many primary sources which were available. So that was the statement given by the scholars. Then you have A.S. MacDonald. He was an Indologist, a Sanskrit scholar. He wrote on the Sanskrit history of Sanskrit literature, and he also Sanskrit grammar. So ये बोलता है कि they have produced ancient Indians produced literature but not history. They have produced literature but not history. And he also says that the chronological content, the chronology or the events, we cannot measure the exact events in chronological order. Place exact events and places in chronological order. So then there is another scholar, McCrindle. He is very important because he translated many of the Greco-Roman foreign accounts into English. So he was the one who translated, Megasthenes Indica, Pliny the Elder's treatise, and also Ptolemy's geography, and the Periples of the Erythraean Sea. So all these sources, he translated, and he says that Indians did not write history, but they have produced voluminous, Sanskrit literature. Voluminous Sanskrit literature. So, and along with them, along with these British administrators and historians and Indologists, there were another important Indian scholars also. Like, for example, R.G. Bhandarkar. R.G. Bhandarkar, as we all know, he was the founding member of the Prarthana Samaj. He was a social reformer as well as a good historian. He wrote on the political history of Shatavahanas and also on the history of Shaivism and on the history of Vishnu and Shaivism. So he also agreed to the what these scholars were saying, that the ancient Indians, quote unquote Hindus, lack historical sense. So then but all these scholars only agree to one thing which is in common, is they consider Kalhana's Raja Tarangani Kalhana's Raja Tarangini to be the only historical sources, only historical source of some kind, which meets the standards of what the Westerners perceive how a history should be written, or what is a historical document. Okay, so these are the scholars: McCrindle, Lionel James Torret, then Hutton, A.S. MacDonald, and even some Indian scholars like R.G. Bandaka. Now, let us see, do Indians actually lack historical sense, or how did our historians, how did our Indian historians react to the allegations made by the Western scholars? Now let us try to understand who are those Indian historians who were in favor of saying that Indians did not lack any historical sense. So who are those scholars? U.N. Ghoshal, R.C. Majumdar, R.C. Dutt, then Radha Kumud Mukherjee, Radha Kamal Mukherjee, and most important is Romila Thapar. All these historians went back to the scriptures from the primary sources and tried to produce and translated those books into English, studied those books, primary sources and scriptures, and trying to project Indian history. And historians, ancient Indian historians, did not lack any historical sense. So especially if you look at U.N. Ghoshal, he wrote on in the ancient Indian Hindu polity. So he was the one trying to glorify that even we do have, like Greeks has done with the republics, even during the Mahajanapada period, we have Lichavis, we have Sakyas and Mallas, which were republics. So we also had some kind of a republican history like that of the Greece, ancient Greeks. So they, in one or the other sense, they try to project that ancient Indians did produce historical records and they did not lack any historical sense. And the most important of them all was Romila Thapar, who has categorically studied all the scriptures and said that we have two kinds of histories from our ancient Itihasa Purana tradition. Ancient historical tradition. She said that ancient historical tradition found in Itihasa Purana tradition. So Romila Thapar was the one who systematically categorized our ancient histories, especially if you take up Vedas or the sacred sources, Shruti literature or the Smriti literature into one, and many other secular books, and also how history can be extracted out of the scriptures. So she talks about particularly Itihasa Purana tradition. So what is Itihasa Purana tradition? Let us try to understand that. Itihasa means What is Itihas? Itihas nothing but it is also history in other terms. So Itihasa Purana tradition means Itihasa, we have histories in, you know, in the form of epics, in the form of mythologies, in the form of, even in the Vedas, which can be extracted. So all those extractions, she calls it as embedded history. What she calls as embedded history. Histories. So embedded history is nothing but where you, if you look at the scriptures or the text, ancient text, you cannot understand the historical context kind of a thing, because you need to extract it from those myths, legends, and even stories. So you need to extract the historical consciousness of the ancient Indians. You need to extract the historical consciousness from myths, legends, even from epics and stories. So that extraction of historical consciousness is known as embedded histories. So now let us try to look at what is Itihasa Purana and what are its various forms in which she tried to explain to us. Even in the Rig Veda, if you look at it, most of it is, in the form of hymns or prayers to gods. So even then, even there, you have mention of gatis. It is like hero lauding the heroes, praying and praising the heroes. Heroes for their deeds and events, So that is gatis. Then comes your important thing known as akyanas. Akyans is a part of, Akyan is nothing but a historical narrative. Is a historical narrative in the form of stories, which is a part of the larger text, and it is also called as narrative, historical narrative. So some of the examples of Akyanas are Sundara Kanda of Ramayana. As you know that, the Ramayana is divided into various parvas, and one of the parva is Sundara Kanda Parva. So Sundara Kanda Parva is a typical kind of an Akyan, which talks about the हनुमान जी का जो लंका जाने का और सीता जी को मिलते हैं, और जो लंका में वो जो कांड करता है हनुमान जी, लंका को जलाने का जो पूरा प्रक्रिया जो है, and all those stories related to the exploits of Lord Hanuman, when he visits Lanka, is in the form of Akyan, So that is one example. Then in the Brahman, Sundarakanda, then another example of Akyan is your Harivamsha. Harivamsha is a part of Mahabharata. It's a part of Mahabharata, and it talks about the genealogies of Vrishni clan. Which is nothing but Lord Krishna belongs to the Vrishni clan. So we get the details of Krishna and its clan details from Harivamsha. And Bhagavad Purana also talks about Krishna and his Leelas and its events associated with Lord Krishna, Bhagavad Purana. Bhagavad Purana. And another example in Mahabharata is the Ramopakyan. Ramopakyan. So Ramopakyan is Markandeya, sage Markandeya in Mahabharata. He is explaining the moral and ethical values what Rama used to have, and how, and he teaches his righteousness, the Rama's righteousness, to the Pandavas, because Markandeya is teaching the Pandavas during Mahabharata times. So it is one of the examples of the Akyans. So through this thing, Akyans, we can extract and explore, extract the history, where it is talking about the historical consciousness can be extracted, where it is talking about events, places, and persons, who are of historical context, importance as well. So that is about Akyans. You have then Itivritta. Itivritta. It's all about Itivritta. In other words, it's all about the events of the man, events of the past events of men of great importance. And the Natya Shastra of Bharata Muni, 2nd century BCE to Natya Shastra, Bharata Muni, 2nd century BCE to, it was somewhere compiled around 2nd century CE. So, in the Natya Shastra, Itivritta becomes the central plot, and this Itivritta becomes the foundation for any historical drama. It's a foundation for any historical drama. So, and it is divided into 3 parts. When there is a plot regarding one great persons or known persons, it is known as Prakyata. It is known as Prakyata. So it is talking about, the Itivrittas are talking about some known figures and heroes or gods. It is known as Prakyata. Especially Rama, you are talking about Lord Rama or Lord Krishna, that becomes Prakyata. So you are narrating stories or enacting drama, Itivritta becomes the central part where you are talking about Prakyata or known figures. Then comes your Utpadya. Utpadya means fictional accounts. It's a kind of a fictional stories, historical stories. So you are trying to create some fictional characters out of it and trying to extract the historical consciousness by fictional accounts. That is Utpadya. And the third part of Itivritta is Sankirna. Sankirna means a mix of both Prakyata and Utpadya is known as Sankirna. There would be some context where there is a fictional story or fictional characteristics, and in some other context there would be the Prakyata, where the figures, the context, as we all know, would be of some great importance, like Lord Rama or Lord Krishna or Hanuman, etc., etc., etc. So this is Itivritta. Then we have another account is known as Danastuti. Danastutis. So this is Danastuti, as we all know, as we can understand, this is a Sanskrit word. You praise certain kings and certain patrons. praising certain kings and patrons who have contributed to the Vedic sacrifices. Contributed to the Vedic sacrifices known as Dhanastutis. So, you in the Rigveda and other scriptures, we know about many kings. Devadasa, Sudas, so these are all Vedic kings. During the Rigvedic period of time, they were the Vedic kings, Vedic tribes, and the kings associated with them, and the hymns are in praise of, Dhanastutis are in praise of these kings. So the historical consciousness can be extracted, and the events and the associated places also can be extracted through Dhanastutis. And another Itihas Purana tradition is Veena Gatins. Veena Gatins. As the name indicates, Veena is the Rudra Veena, the musical instrument Rudra Veena, and Gatins is in praise. So this, especially those, you praise certain rajas or kings or princes while conducting the sacred rituals like Rajasuya or Ashwamedha sacrifices. So it is literally using the Rudra Veena, you are singing, they have sung about the, or praising about the rajas who have conducted the Vedic sacrifices and donated lot of patronage or given patronage or gifts to priestly class. So that is Veena Gatins. So you can extract out of this. So who are the kings who have conducted Ashwamedha sacrifices or the Rajasuya sacrifices is known from Veena Gatins. Okay. So then these are all something which are part of embedded history. Part of embedded history. So next we will see what is externalized history as categorized by Pramila Thapar. Externalized history. Which are much more evident, the histories of regional chronicles where the history or the historical conscious is evident, explicitly evident in the chronicles, because there is a chronological order or the genealogies of kings and dynasties mentioned. The best example here is Kalhana's Rajatarangini. In the 12th century, Kashmir. So in the 12th century Kashmir, it's a kind of a historical known record which is accepted by every scholar that it contains the historical sense, externalized historical sense, historical consciousness. Okay. The other is 7th century CE biography of Harsha written by Banabhatta. It is known as Harsha Charita. Harsha Charita of Banabhatta is another example. So then onwards, from the 12th century onwards, we have historical records, especially Kalana's Rajatarangani and Banabhatta Harsha Charita. So this is how Romila Thapar has categorized that no, what the Western scholars are saying, we do not agree to it, and we have Indians have that historical sense right from the earliest times, and we can extract the historical consciousness from various sources and from various literature, as I have mentioned here, like Gatins, Akyanas, Itivrittas, Danastutis, and Veena-Gatins. Okay. Now, you need to understand one thing here also, that when Romila Thapar is categorizing this thing, she has given another layer to it. So, in the initial Rigvedic times, the society was clan based, the clan based society. It was a clan based society. The best example can be that of Kauravas and Pandavas. The fight for land and ownership, fight for cattle, fight for land and prosperity is clearly mentioned in the War of Mahabharata. Okay, so when in the later Vedic period, when they started moving towards the eastern part of India, especially in the Gangetic belt, especially eastern UP and Bihar, the use of iron and the agriculture surplus, along with it came the trade specialization, urban centers, and also when kingdoms were formed, it moved to hereditary kinship. It moved to hereditary kinship. And the codification of laws, and so when this transition was happening, the historical consciousness moved from embedded history to externalized history. That is what another layer of knowledge is being that is how Romila Thapar has added another layer to this subject, that ancient Indians, when they were clan based, so it was all embedded. The literature was embedded, the past events was embedded in various scriptures or texts. But when it became kingdoms, it becomes hereditary kingship, and there was a codification of laws, because you need to create a social order by adhering to the principles of kinship and rituals, etc., etc., etc. So then the recording of the past has become important, and also it was made externalized. So the historical consciousness have transited from embedded to externalized history. Okay. So why did I not take the Puranas in the part of it? Because that was the earlier, whatever I have discussed, whether it is Dhanastutis, Gatins, or Itivrittas, or extraction, which were embedded part of history, were from the earlier times. But Puranas are something which have special place here. Puranas have special place in the entire Itihas Purana tradition. So which we will take up now. Now let us talk about Purana in Itihas Purana tradition. So in Sanskrit it is called as Puranam. and not as Puran or जो पुरानास बोलते हैं ना, वैसा नहीं है. It is Puranam in Sanskrit. So ये पुराण का मतलब क्या है, पुराणम का मतलब क्या है? पुराणम का मतलब है एंशिएंट लोर. लोर का मतलब हो गया कथा, हो गया है ज्ञान, हो गया है, और नहीं तो इवन विद्या भी हो गया है. ज्ञान, इट्स बेसिकली ज्ञान, नॉलेज, या हम यू कैन ऑल्सो से इट एज पारंपरिक ज्ञान. So इसमें one needs to understand is that the knowledge of the Puranas has been transmitted from one generation to another generation in a oral lore kind of a thing. It is an oral tradition. So one is what is that? It is an oral tradition transmitted from one generation to another generation, and it has many stories or knowledge available to us. In English, lore का मतलब है it's a body of knowledge. Body of knowledge passed on from one generation to another on a particular subject or a particular topic, or about kings or queens or genealogies of kings and queens or gods and goddesses, and also about the particular events and places associated with it. So that is the Purana in etymological origins. So what is this Puranas all about? The Purana जो बोलता है, वेदों में बोलता है कि पुराना का पंच लक्षण होता है. पंच लक्षण. What are those pancha lakshans of Puranas? So pancha lakshana of Purana is, first thing is lakshana or characteristics. First thing is sarga. Sarga or creation, the cosmic origins of creation or the cosmic origins is mentioned in the sarga part. How the world as such is been created, how the cosmos has been created. It talks about the sarga part of it. And there is pratisarga. Pratisarga is nothing but the dissolution or जो अंत है, जो क्रिएशन हुआ तो उसका भी एक अंत हुआ है, क्योंकि फ्रॉम वन महायुग टू अनदर महायुग देयर वाज दिस काइंड ऑफ एन धर्मा टू अधर्मा. सो बहुत धर्म हो रहा था तो एक महायुग में, by the end of the one Mahayug, there was kind of an adharma which was, unruly, unrighteousness among the people. There was a lot of sins associated with it. That is why gods have destructed the entire universe and also created new, afresh. So that is known as Pratisarga. So for example, if you wanted to look at a kind of a story here, we all know about Manu. So during the Matsya Purana, it is said that Lord Vishnu told Manu, the first Manu, that there is a lot of sin happening and the people have become unrighteous. So we need to destroy. So what do? You build a ship and gather all the animals, one each, and also all the kind of a sample. So you help in recreating the entire universe or the entire world as such. So in the form of Matsya, Lord Vishnu helps Manu in recreation. So that is the story. And for everything, there is pratisarga. So the Panchalakshana में एक सर्गा होता है, creation होता है, तो cosmic origins होता है, तो there is also pratisarga, which is dissolution as well as recreation, that is called as pratisarga. And the third lakshana is vamshavali. Vamshavali. Vamshavali means genealogies of lineages. Genealogies are lineages of gods and goddesses or kings. That is known as Vamshavali. Then you have Vamshanu Charita or Charitra. Vamshanu Charita means the genealogies and the history of the various dynasties which were mentioned in the Puranas. Especially in Puranas, we find mentions of many pre-Bharata and Bharata tribes during the Mahabharata period, and later on, with the rise of kingdoms, you give historical importance to all the dynasties. It is right from Haryanka dynasties which ruled Magadha, follows suit, and you have Shishunagas succeeding Haryankas, then Nandas, then Mauryas, so on, Shungas, Kanvas. So, till the rise of Gupta period in the 5th and 3rd century CE, you have mention of many dynasties and the events and the places associated with them, and that is mentioned in the Vamshanu Charitra of each and every Purana. Then you have Manavantara. So Manavantara is nothing but the Manu in each Mahayug. Manu has a certain, for each and every eon, there is one Manu who takes care of the entire universe, who will be watching us, and he will be the one who, looks at people are being righteous or being unrighteous. So he looks after that. So for now, the present Manu is Vaivatsa Manu. Vatsa Manu. So one Mahayuga is equal to 4320000 solar years. Okay. So as we know, these are the 5 lakshanas. So these are the 5 pancha lakshanas of any Purana. So generally, as a convention, we have known to have 18 major Puranas. And another 18 sub Puranas. So out of the major 18 Puranas, the avatars of Lord Vishnu, in 10 avatars of Lord Vishnu, so they were very prominent, like Matsya, Vayu, Vishnu, Padma, then you have Markandeya, Bhagavata, Brahmanda, then Brahma Vaivarta, Bhavishya, then Brahma, then Varaha, Shiva, Linga, Skanda. So similarly, these are the major Puranas which are available to us, and they were written sometime, compiled and written sometime in the 2nd century CE till 12th century. The exact dates, we can only assume that they were written sometime in the 2nd century CE. They were they were much more older. The content, the vishay, जो पुराना का जो विषय है, they were much more older than the compilation. So we have 18 major Puranas and 18 sub Puranas, and generally the major 18 Puranas are attributed to Vedavyas. Okay, so now let us see what is that, why did the Puranas are also called as Panchama Veda or the 5th Veda. Now let us understand why Puranas are also considered as the 5th Veda. Especially Chandogya Upanishad and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad they mention that they are considered to be the Panchama Veda or the 5th Veda because generally the Vedic knowledge is very difficult to understand by common people. So Puranas, in the form of stories, in the form of myths, legends and stories, they were able to convert or transit it to the common people and more diverse audience. So that was possible because of the Puranic literature. So that is one reason, and also it not only, there are many philosophical discourses in the Vedic literature, especially the Aranyaks and the Upanishads, which are of all philosophical discourses and very complex subjects, जो उन चीज़ों को बहुत सिंप्लीफाई करके स्टोरी को रूपों में देन इन द फॉर्म ऑफ मिथ्स, इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लेजेंड्स के प्रकार से एक इजीली समझाने का कोशिश किया है पुराना ट्रेडिशन में. सो दैट इज व्हाई द छंदोग्य उपनिषद एंड बृहदारण्यक उपनिषद इसको बोलता है कि पुराना जो है वो है, they are the 5th Vedas, which are equally important in transiting the Vedic wisdom to the diverse audience of Hindu society. And the second thing is also to make it simpler. The philosophical discourses on Brahman, Atman, and the existence, the cosmic realities, cosmic creation, the dissolution, the karma, punarjanma, whatnot, everything which has metaphysical attributes are simplified and are transmitted in the form of stories, legends, and myths. So that is why it is known as Panchama Veda. So now coming to the existential question, why have we discussed this topic today? Why? Because in our previous year's questions, especially in history optional, UPSC history optional, there was a question, can you elaborate on the Itihasa, early Indian historical tradition with regard to Itihasa Purana tradition, and what are its characteristics of its genre? So this was asked for 15 marks question. So if you look at it, we have, and to summarize it and to look at it, we can say that the background, we need to structure our answers by building a background. So Indian past was discovered by the colonial administrators as an administrative necessity to rule and expand the British rule in India, and there, while discovering the India's past, they were unable to comprehend because they were looking the attributes of history from the Western point of view. Okay, that would be the context. So, what was the attributes of history from which they were looking from the Western point of view were three things. One is the chronological aspect or the linear evolution of time in a chronological order. But whereas the Indian, when they look at the Puranas or when they look at the time, ours, we talk sometimes in terms of microseconds, especially like, the Nadia, then we talk about, Yama. These are all measurements of time. Then also Muhurta, Nadika, Yama, Muhurta. These are all, we are talking time in microseconds. And in the Puranas, we are talking about Mahayugas, which is one Mahayuga is equal to 4320000 solar years. And we are talking about the cosmic cyclic nature of time. That is, one Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, and the creation, some recreation, cyclic nature of time we are talking about. So they were confused. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is the historical writings in Europe, especially during the Enlightenment period, was driven by the human agency. They gave primacy to they have kept aside the religious explanation to the historical events and persons, and gave primacy to the human agency, and they wanted to promote humanism and rationality during the medieval times by taking reference of the historical writings. But in India, if you look at it, when they were trying to rediscover and discover Indian history, everything, every facet of the society or the way what the common people are doing, how are they following their traditions, and also how they are taking up their own professions, and it is all for them, it was all linked to our religious explanations, because we are talking, all the scriptures or many scriptures are talking about karma, punarjanma, guna theory, varna system, and so on and so forth, rinas. So it is all associated with the religious explanation. So that is where the Europeans were unable to comprehend. Okay. The third thing which they got perplexed was the polytheistic characteristics of the Indian society, where we have many gods and goddesses. And in Europe, it was more of a monotheistic religion, which majorly it was Christianity, and the patronage given by various emperors of Europe. And here we have many patronages, like the Buddhist, some emperors have given patronage to Buddhists, the Ajivikas, some Jains, and the regional fragmentation of it. So that is where, if you look at from the lens of the Europeans, how they want to attribute history, so that they were not able to see it from the Indian point of view, and by misunderstanding the entire scriptures, whatever the translations has been made by the colonial administration or historians, they were unable to comprehend. That is where they had to say that ancient Indians, especially Hindus, lack the historical sense. But our historians have come up with the explanation that it is embedded history and externalized history, especially Romila Thapar, when we are talking about especially Itihas Purana tradition. In the Itihas Purana traditions, we have Gatins, we have Akyans, we have Danastutis, we have Veena Gatins, and also we have Itivrittas, and majorly we have Puranas. to that matter, that we can extract history, or the historical consciousness can be extracted out of this scriptures and set text, and we can relate and corroborate with other sources. So that is how there is a historical consciousness in the historical consciousness in India as well as with the Indian ancient scholars. Okay, so that is how you have to clearly mention the answer. In addition to that, whether it is embedded or externalized, we have, as I told you, there is this Banabhatta's Harshacharita as well as Rajatarangani, which are very prominent in explicitly mentioning the historical consciousness. So thus Indians, we do agree, we do agree, and we should not agree with what the Westerners have been saying, that Indians lack historical sense, but we do have the historical sense in this way. So that is how you conclude the answer. So thank you very much, and let us see you with another topic tomorrow.